Welcome to Crocodile MTG, your home of competitive, constructed play in all Magic the Gathering formats. Today's video was brought to you by all our wonderful sponsors, affiliates, and patrons. Thank you all for supporting the Crocodile MTG channel, and we hope you enjoy today's video. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jordan with Crocodile MTG, here bringing you another Magic the Gathering video. Today we're going to be playing Dredge-less Dredge in Pioneer. So if you're unfamiliar with the dredge mechanic, essentially the basis of it, the dredge is to get things in your graveyard. Dredge is a mechanic which you can mill the top cards of your library to put a card from your graveyard into your hand instead of drawing a card. That's a replacement effect. So that's where the kind of dredge portion of it came into play. Obviously in Pioneer there is no dredge cards unless they decide to print some in Standard, or if they come out with a Pioneer Masters they could print dredge, but I don't think we're going to ever see dredge in Pioneer in my personal opinion. If we do, I'd be surprised. Maybe it's a little more underpowered, but I think dredge is just one of the most powerful mechanics out there, so I don't think that's going to ever happen. Anyhow, besides my rant, thank you so much for being here. Please hit that like and subscribe button while you're here if you enjoy my deck techs and enjoy the videos. I'd really appreciate that. But anyhow, let's get into this deck tech because I'm super excited about this deck. This deck is super powerful. It looks super good, both in paper and on MTGO right now. This deck is really overperforming for me. So again, Dredge-less Dredge. Essentially, the basis of the deck is to get a bunch of cards in your graveyard and then bring them back for super powerful abilities, or basically bring things back to trigger super powerful abilities and just have this recursive threat from your graveyard. So obviously, we got to get things into our graveyard. So where do we start with that? Well, our number one go-to is Stitcher Supplier. Stitcher Supplier puts 3 cards in the graveyard when it enters the battlefield, but then when it dies also, which is, I mean, this card's a great blocker, it also puts 3 cards into your graveyard when it dies. So this card was actually played in Modern and I think Legacy as well, in the Hogak decks, because 1, it's a black creature, 2, it's a fantastic card for putting cards in your graveyard, because it's essentially 6 cards for 1 mana. Even if it dies a few turns later, that's still, you only spent 1 mana to put 6 cards in your graveyard. That's really good. Now, going past Stitcher Supplier, we also have the cards Gather the Pack and Grizzly Salvage. These cards are the other 2 top put things in your graveyard cards. Grizzly Salvage is probably the better of the 2, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature or land card from among them into your hand and put the rest in the bottom, or rest into your graveyard. The other part of Grizzly Salvage that makes it really good is its instant speed. So you don't have to play this on your main phase. This can be played at the end of your opponent's main phase, and then if you hit something like Prized Amalgam and Narcomoeba, that'll all trigger, which we'll get to that portion of it in a second. So Grizzly Salvage is probably one of your best dredgers other than Stitcher Supplier, because Stitcher Supplier is just the most mana efficient dredger. The other one, Gather the Pack. So this one's a little less powerful because 1, it is sorcery speed. The other portion of it though is it only hits creatures. So reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature from among them into your hand and put the rest into your graveyard. If you have Spell Mastery, which a lot of times you will, you can put 2 cards in the graveyard. You can get 2 creatures from those 5 and put them into your hand. A lot of times, though, when you're delving with, not delving, I apologize. When you're putting things into your graveyard with Grizzly Salvage and Gather the Pack, if you're hitting like things like Creeping Chill, Narcomoeba, and Prized Amalgam, a lot of times you want those in your graveyard. So you do not have to take anything if you don't want to, because it does say you may put a creature, so you may put a creature from among them into your hand. You don't have to. And Spell Mastery says you may put up to 2 creatures in your hand. So you don't have to put either of them if you don't want to. And Grizzly Salvage is the same way. You may put a creature or land from among them into your hand. So with Grizzly Salvage, though, I will say if you're putting a land into your graveyard and you don't need it to delve right away, put that into your hand, just because there's certain cards in our deck that require discard outlets. And having that extra land in your hand is pretty good as well. So the last dredger we have to get cards into our graveyard is Satyr Wayfinder. Now this is the least effective dredger we have. So Satyr Wayfinder. So let's go through this real quick. Stitcher Supplier, 1 mana, can put up to 6 cards in grave. Gather the Pack is 2 mana, and if you take a card, then it puts 4 cards in grave. Or if you take 2 cards, it puts 3. But a lot of times you're not going to take those 2 cards. Grizzly Salvage, same thing. You put 1 card, either a creature or land, in your hand. It puts 4 cards in your graveyard. So right off the bat, we have 6, 4, 4. Now, Satyr Wayfinder, if you're taking a land from this, only puts 3. So that's why it's the least efficient dredger. But it's still a very good card, and it makes for a good blocker. So Satyr Wayfinder, when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and you may put a land card from among them into your hand, and then put the rest into your graveyard. So Satyr Wayfinder, again, even though it's the least, it does help you hit those land drops, though, it is relevant in this deck. You do want, one, you either want lands to discard later on to some cards we're going to talk about in a minute. 2, we do want to put... we do want to hit our land drops. So if you're at 2 mana, you're looking for that 3rd land. A lot of times 3 of the 4 lands is enough. I normally quit playing them after 3 unless I need them. But and 4 is okay too, because then you can Scrap Heap and Haunt the Dead, or we'll get to these cards in a second. But honestly, hitting your land drops is important in this deck. And Satyr Wayfinder helping you find lands is actually more important than you think it would be. So next on our list, let's go through the key cards we're trying to hit with our dredgers. I'm sorry. We have one more card to put cards in our graveyard, and that's Ashiok Dream Renderer. We have one in the main, one on the side. So there's 2 reasons to run this card. The first, spells and abilities your opponents control cannot cause their controllers to search their library. So, Ashiok, if you're playing against a green deck that's trying to ramp up, now the field of the decks kind of went away, so this isn't as important as that, but Ashiok, if you're playing against a green deck that's like searching their library for lands, some of them are playing like Nissa's Pilgrimage, and a couple decks I saw were more of an adventure side, and they were playing the giant that searches their library. So Ashiok's actually good against those. Also, any deck that's playing Fable Passage is going to not be able to search their library for that. So that's actually pretty good. Now, it's just kind of an addition to what this card actually does. And the -1 ability on this card is really good. So it says target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, and then each opponent exiles their graveyard. So what that means is you can minus this, target yourself, and you can mill 4. But the second part of that, then exile each opponent's graveyard. So each opponent is getting their graveyard exiled. So it's not the same person you target with that ability that's getting their opponent or their graveyard exiled. So if you're playing against the mirror, you get to exile your opponent's graveyard, which is super good. If you're playing against any delve deck, that's super important as well. I know there a lot of control decks are relying on the graveyard to delve things like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. And any aggressive deck that's trying to delve Dig Through Time, or a Girma Angler even, this is going to be able to exile their graveyard. 2, it's getting a lot of cards. It's getting 4 cards, and it's recursive as well. So after Ashiok comes down, you can keep milling yourself, which is really good. But it mills for 4 every turn, exiles your opponent's graveyard every turn. It's super powerful in the mirror. It's super powerful against decks that are trying to ramp up and searching for lands, and it's super powerful against decks that are trying to utilize their graveyard. So Ashiok is the last way that we have, other than discarding the hand size, to actually get cards into your graveyard in the main deck. So what are we trying to hit? So our main card here that we are trying to hit is Prized Amalgam. Prized Amalgam is a zombie from Shadows over Innistrad. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from the graveyard or you cast it from the graveyard, return prized amalgam from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of your next end step. So prized amalgam triggers out of the graveyard whenever you bring back something from the graveyard. So what cards can we play that we want to make prized amalgam come back from the graveyard? Well, those cards are Narcomoeba. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to organize this. We have Narcomoeba. Narcomoeba, it was reprinted, I believe, in M19, I believe. So it's a flying illusion. It's a 1/1. But whenever it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, whenever it's put into your graveyard from your library, you may put it into your, onto the battlefield. So Narcomoeba, if it gets dredged over or milled over by Grizzly Salvage or Gather the Pack or Stitcher Supplier, if it gets put in the graveyard first, and then you get to choose if you want it to enter the battlefield. If it enters the battlefield and prized amalgam is in your graveyard, then it triggers prized amalgam when it comes onto the battlefield. I apologize, getting tongue-tied there. And then prized amalgam will come back at the beginning of the next end step. That's an important note. I'll get to that in a second. Scrap Heap Scrounger is the other way. So Scrap Heap Scrounger is a construct that cannot block. It's a 3/2, which is actually super important. And you can play one. You can pay 1 and a black and exile another creature card from your graveyard. So if you have like a Stitcher Supplier or a Satyr Wayfinder or a Girma Angler that went to the graveyard, we don't have any ways to get those cards back. So you can exile those to Scrap Heap Scrounger and then bring it back from your graveyard. Then any prized amalgam in your graveyard will come back at the end of turn because Scrap Heap entered the battlefield from the grave. The other way is Haunted Dead. Haunted Dead is a zombie from, I believe this is Shadows Over, no, this is Eldritch Moon, I'm sorry. This is Shadows Over Innistrad, that's Eldritch Moon. So the other way is Haunted Dead. This is a zombie out of Eldritch Moon. So whenever it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So that's actually super important. But you can pay 1 and a black and discard 2 cards from hand. So this is why it's important to pick up your lands from like Satyr Wayfinder and Grizzly Salvage, because Haunted Dead requires 2 cards to discard, and you get to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. And when you do that, if Prize Amalgam is in your graveyard, it does return to the battlefield. Haunted Dead also creates essentially a 1/1 blocker when it enters, because it does enter the battlefield tapped, but the 1/1 spirit does not. The 1/1 spirit's a good blocker here. So those are the main creatures of the deck. Is you want to be able to mill over and recur all these threats and bring back prized amalgams, which happens a lot sooner than you think, especially with the dredgers here. The other card, which is completely free, this is a card out of Ravnica Allegiance. It's Creeping Chill. Or maybe this is Guilds of Ravnica, not Ravnica Allegiance. Creeping Chill is a card out of Guilds of Ravnica. I apologize. So if it's put into your graveyard from your library, you may exile it from your graveyard. If you do, deal 3 damage to each opponent, and you gain 3 life. So Creeping Chill is a super effective, free, drain your opponent for 3, gain 3. So that's a super powerful ability. If it is in your hand, if you hit 4 mana, which you do more times than not, you can just play it too to deal those last 3 points of damage. It's a little expensive for casting it, but if you mill over this for like with anything here, you get to just exile it for free and deal 3 damage for free and gain 3 for free. Like, that's super good against your aggressive decks that you're trying to gain some life. It buffers your life total some. And just, we're trying to kill our opponent. So if we're dealing with that with damage and we just get to deal 3 damage out of nowhere to them, that's super powerful. So then lastly, since we're putting a bunch of cards in our graveyard, we are playing 3 Girma Anglers. Girmog's just a super effective 5/5 dredger that we get to just throw out on the battlefield turn 3 typically, and just beat our opponent to death. 5/5 is a big power and toughness, and a lot of cards in this field, do not deal with it. Removal is very, I guess, not universal. Like, you don't have your like path to exiles and things like that. So Gurmag in this format's very, very good. Last on our list of cards to talk about, this card overperformed a lot when I was playing it, and I'm super impressed with it. Driven Despair. So Driven, the Driven side of it is a sorcery. You can cast this side from your hand if you draw it. So until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So Driven is it's a pretty good card. I mean, giving all your creatures trample, if you have an early Girma Angler, that's pretty good. If your hand's light and they have no blockers, Driven, being able to draw a bunch of cards for, like, let's say you have like a Stitcher Supplier, a couple Narc Amoebas, and something like really small like a Satyr Wayfinder or two, you get to draw like 2 or 3 cards just out of nowhere. Excuse me. So Driven it's a pretty good card by itself. Being able to give your creatures trample, being able to draw a bunch of cards is good. But the card side that overperforms is Despair. Despair it has Aftermath, so it can only be cast from your graveyard. But until end of turn, creatures you control gain Menace, which is super good. So this is a go wide strategy as is. So you're going to have a lot of creatures that are like 2 or 3 power just across the board. Giving them all Menace, making them harder to block, is extremely good when you're trying to get in those last points of damage. So Menace right away is fantastic. The other part that is insane is whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. So being able to give everything Menace, deal like 2 or 3 points of damage, or get in with like 2 or 3 creatures because they can't block everything, is going to make it so if your opponent does survive that attack, they pretty much have no cards in hand, and they're going to be top decking an answer. That's the only way they can do anything, is by trying to top deck an answer. Despair is a super powerful card and a super powerful blowout if you can get it down. We are running only 20 lands in this deck. We're running the 4 Blooming Marsh, 3 Botanical Sanctum. We're running 3 Lanamore Waste, 4 Overgrown Tomb, 2 Swamps, 3 Watery Graves, and a Woodland Cemetery. This deck is extremely powerful. I recommend it a lot. Let's go to the sideboard real quick. So we're running 3 Fatal Pushes. This is mainly for our aggressive matchups. This is for the decks that are playing like Mono Red, that's playing a lot of like Monastery Swift Spears, and the other Prowess card that I can't think of for some reason. I want to say Monastery Mentor, but I know that's the white card. I can't think of what it's called. You can leave it in the comments below and yell at me and be like, that card you're talking about is so-and-so. Fatal Push is really good against those decks. Also, decks that are running like 4 CMC creatures, like Murderous Riders of 3, Rankle, Master of Pranks. That was the card I was thinking of. Like Rankle and Cletus and things like that. If your opponent goes and kill, like if they have a lot of removal, but they're also playing like a creature variant where they have like 3 and 4 power, or 3 and 4 CMC creatures, like a lot of control matchups are doing right now, Fatal Push is okay against those. We have Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is kind of a catch-all. We'll bring it in certain matchups. Against control, we probably want them. Really against, I think Thoughtseize is more of a card against decks that are more mid-rangey, that we don't, like there's 1 or 2 cards we don't want to see. And Thoughtseize a lot of time isn't like a turn 1 play. If that's all we can do, since we have a lot of 2 and 3 CMC cards, if Thoughtseize are turn 1 play, that's fine. But I think it's more for the mid-range matchups that's running those 1 or 2 cards that we just want to slow them down just enough. But yeah, Thoughtseize is still pretty good, and it's a good catch-all. You just got to understand your matchups and understand exactly what you're bringing it in for. The other card here is Ashiok. Again, if we want to stop our opponent from searching a bunch of cards, or if we're playing against another graveyard deck, that's kind of our main way to get rid of the graveyard, is Ashiok, while also keeping up our graveyard by milling ourselves. Collective Brutality is a card from Shadows over Innistrad. It's a very good card. I'm sorry, this is Eldritch Moon again. I keep saying Shadows, but that is Eldritch Moon. Collector Brutality has Escalade, so you get to discard a card. So right away, that's already really good for our deck. Being able to discard those extra Narcomoebas you draw, or putting prized amalgams in your graveyard, or even like a Scrap Heap Scrounger to bring back your prized amalgams. Being able to discard cards in this deck is actually more relevant than you'd think, because we don't have a lot of ways main deck to actually discard. We only have ways to kind of mill. So Collector Brutality is a good way to do that. So Collector Brutality is really good against your control decks, your aggressive decks. Against aggro, we want to be using the -2/-2 ability. You can make your opponent reveal their hand and take like a Magma Spray or a Wild Slash or something if they have one. And then you can also make your opponent lose 2 life and gain 2 life. So again, this is just a super effective, efficient way to get some damage in, remove a creature, and take a key card that you don't want to be hit with or playing against. Something like an exile effect for graveyards or something. Now, this is only instant sorcery, so it's not going to hit like your Rest in Peace or your Grafdigger's Cages or anything like that. But it's still a very important card to have. Against control decks, we're probably going to use it just to get rid of those Supreme Verdicts or settle the wreckages. And we can also, gain or deal the 2 damage and gain 2 life. Buffers our life total a little bit, deals a couple damage to your opponent. Collective Brutality is just a really good card. Also, for our removal here, we have a few Assassin's Trophies. Again, this is kind of a catch-all. Assassin's Trophy is good against the mid-range decks and the control decks that are playing cards like, Oko, Siege Rhino, cards we're not going to want to play against. It is relevant with the Assassin's Trophy also if we're playing against like Rekindling Phoenix or Glorybringer. Those are pretty good cards to get rid of with Assassin's Trophy. But again, your Teferi Time Ravelers, not so much Teferi, but Teferi Time Raveler, Oko's a big one that we want to get rid of. It does blow up your Heart of Kirins and also your Mutavaults. Mutavaults, one of those cards that, it doesn't seem that good on face value, but Mutavault sometimes can get in for quite a bit of damage. Abrupt Decay, again, an uncounterable. If we're playing against a low aggressive deck, we can bring in Abrupt Decay. Again, this is more for the control decks, though. If we're trying to get rid of cards like Heart of Kirin or the 3-mana Planeswalkers, not so much Narset, but if we're trying to get rid of like Teferi or Oko, Abrupt Decay is going to come in here. And last on our list is Murderous Cut. So again, this is kind of for the, not so much the aggressive decks, because we're going to want Fatal Push for the low to the ground aggressive, but Murderous Cut's good against those mid-range decks. So we want to be bringing it in against like Glorybringers, Rekindling Phoenixes, things that we want to kill that are pretty big, that we want to be able to kill instant speed. Also, the Delve ability on that makes this basically a 1-mana catch-all for big creatures. But yeah, that's the deck. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you, Mana Traders, for your awesome sponsorship and letting us rent this deck today. They're an awesome card rental service for MTGO. They also do major tabletop events. So if you're looking for a tabletop card rental service, I recommend checking them out. If you use promo code Crocodile, you get to save 15% off your first 3 months of trying out their program. They run a super good program over there. I highly recommend them. I've used them for almost probably 4 or 5 years now, and the fact that they're sponsoring me now since we started Crocodile MTG 1 year ago. This is her 1-year anniversary. Thank you so much, Mana Traders. You're one of our first sponsors, but you seriously have treated me so well over the past year. I honestly couldn't do Crocodile MTG without you. So thank you all so much for watching. Go check out also our new sponsor, TCGPlayer.com. They're very competitive on prices if you're looking for Magic singles. If you do buy off TCG Player, I'm not begging you, but I'm asking you. If you buy off TCG Player, go down to the description below, click on our affiliate link, and check out TCG Player through our affiliate link. What that does is anything you buy on TCG Player through our affiliate link, it'll let you. Unfortunately, there's not like a simple promo code you can enter in, but Crocodile MTG gets a small portion of your purchase for that card or for going through that link. So if you enjoy what we do here at Crocodile MTG, first of all, thank you. And the best way to support us is to like and subscribe and leave comments and let us know how we're doing. And you know, that's the best way to support us. Honestly, supporting us morally and supporting us by subscribing to the channel is one of the best ways for YouTube. But honestly, like, thank you all so much for being here. But if you want to support us a little bit monetizingly while you're just making your purchases, just use our affiliate links. That helps us out quite a bit. But thank you so much for watching, guys. I appreciate you all so much. I'll quit ranting. This deck is awesome. I highly recommend checking this deck out. But thank you so much. And yeah, let's jump into some matches. I'm super excited. So go check out the match in the next video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit that like and subscribe button. Also, check out the description below for more Magic the Gathering content. This was Jordan with Crocodile MTG, and we will see you next time.